Yeah, well, the idea for Bandit Country originated with a quote from James Joyce about Ulysses, where he said that the purpose of that book was if Dublin was wiped off the face of the map tomorrow morning, that somebody could use his book as a document to recreate it down to like the last building or the last street. And I began with that idea about my hometown of Newry, which is just on the Irish border between South Down, South Armagh and North Louth in the Republic of Ireland. But as time went on, I kind of realised that you can't really recreate a place as it stands or as like a fixed entity because places like people are changing all the time. And so as time went on and I was writing more of the book, I came to that realization that, the version of Newry that I was chasing was like chasing a ghost. And so I wanted to kind of explore that contradiction between, on the one hand being true to what I remembered and what I knew, but on the other hand kind of reflecting that reality of change and moving forward. One of the tensions obviously in the book is, between this fixed idea of home, which in my mind still is Newry, which the book is about. But on the other hand, the kind of, generational aspect of migration, this is something that kind of goes back to my own experience within my own family of several generations kind of coming and going between England and Ireland and, trying to find work and different things like that. And so, yeah, that's definitely a tension that's at the centre of the book. Another thing, to mention would be that the idea of, a place as kind of always moving and always kind of shifting came from a really big influence of mine, Kieran Carson, who sort of approaches Belfast in the same way that Joyce approaches Dublin. But, one of the key differences, again, between Joyce and Carson is that idea of fixity and place. Kieran's work is obsessed with, the idea of, Belfast, literally kind of changing where streets are kind of disappearing and replaced with new buildings, and the idea of a fixed idea of home is only ever personal and individual. And the tension as well of somebody who exists for the rest of their life as an immigrant in other places, like Joyce. It's just interesting that he left Dublin when he was 25 and never went back, but that the place that he wrote about for the rest of his career was Dublin. It was like he couldn't escape from that idea of it, or the idea that he had developed of it when he was a child. So I guess in Irish poetry, there's always been a sort of binary idea of language. That is, people who write in kind of standard or received English, with bits and pieces of Hiberno English and slang peppered throughout, or they write as Gaeilge or in Irish. And so, what I wanted to do was to kind of explore the space between that, because whereas in Scots writing, there exists like a great tradition of dialect writing, going right back to Robert Burns through Hugh MacDiarmid, Tom Leonard. That same tradition doesn't really exist in Irish poetry. And so, what I wanted to do was to borrow a little bit from the Scots tradition and see what would happen if I, planted that somewhere else. Because it would have felt disingenuous to me to write a book about where I was from, in this kind of very grammatically correct, sort of proper way. But similarly, it would have felt disingenuous to write it in Irish, just because that wasn't my experience of growing up. My experience of growing up was listening to people talk in a very specific language, very specific kind of form of communication, and to kind of bring across the reality of that place. It was important for that thread to run throughout the book. I can never really remember this amount of debuts being on the list. I think it displays, the prize is um, you know, fresh kind of new approach. It's recognition that, you know, some of the most exciting poetry being written within the UK and Ireland is coming from kind of a new generation who are, you know, taking apart maybe old forms and refashioning them into something else. And also, you know, the people on the list who, you know, aren't on their debuts are people who I've long admired as writers. You know, people like Zafar Kunyal and Philip Gross are people that I would have kind of read, you know, from years before when they had been nominated or won the prize. So yeah, it feels like a very big honour to kind of be among all of those great people.